It is.
I'm resident of Colorwood for YouTube. Joel Sage. That's my buddy Patrick McCray. That's my buddy Alan Gallant. We're here to ask the question: does Barnabas pass the Bechdel test? With the question mark. Um, so I know what my answer is going to be, so I'll go last. Alan, does Barnabas pass said test?
Depends on what set of rules we're using.
Maybe we should establish what the Bechdel test
Bechdel test
is.
Yeah, sorry.
And the weird variant that we are using as a Procrustean bed.
Okay, so the Bechdel test, no, God damn it, creating the characters that encompass the rich diversity of humanity is particularly pertinent to screenwriting, where representation really does matter. However, gender inclusively in media has long been questionable at best. This is, and I think I'm reading for the fucking
Joel, just stop. What we need is
yeah. Sorry, I got it.
Something more encapsulated. And as the cuckoo came up with this, can I sort of describe what we're using, what we're calling the Bechdel test for our purposes?
Well, I clicked on the wrong thing, is what it is. Sorry.
We all did at one time or another, Your Honor.
Yeah. Well, real quick, also known as the Bechdel-Wallace test, which is a measure of the representation of women in film and other fiction. The test asks whether a work features at least two female characters who have a conversation about something other than a man. Some versions of the test also require that those two female characters have names. So what version are we using?
Well, this is my own version. You know, the way I have come to sort of use the term and throw it around is a little looser. But basically is this a character, normally a female character, but in this case Barnabas, who exists in a text for some reason other than to pine for or be focused on a love interest? Do they exist for some reason other than to facilitate this love interest? And you know, as I was thinking about it the other day on the cab ride over to the studio, I realized that, you know, microscopically, sure, Barnabas is interested in all kinds of stuff, you know, saving this person, getting revenge on that person. And, you know, these I Ching ones had nothing to do with Josette. You know, he does it for David, but David's not a love interest. You know, he's a family member. And so I realized overall, holy cow, I think Barnabas may slightly flunk it.
In one respect, he does. I agree with you, because he is serially involved with some sort of romantic image, at least, of you know, that lover that he either he ever had or cannot have. So he's highly motivated at various times by that. It does form a thread.
And the way I kind of arrived at that thought was I've wondered for a long time both what did he see specifically in Angelique? He's a rich guy surrounded by a lot of beautiful women, a lot of interesting women too. You know, I mean, he's in Martinique, so it's a port town, and you're getting all sorts of people from different areas. You know, and to get there from outside of Martinique, you probably have to have, you know, some scratch or a good, especially for a woman. It wouldn't be a sailor or something.
No.
And so you know, he certainly has his pick. And I thought a lot about, sort of in a macroscopic sense, what does Barnabas want as a character, you know, overall? Who is he in 1795? We really find out damn little. he has, very few conversations with Jeremiah or just about, hey, certainly enjoyed that chess game the other day.
Right.
Even that, we don't really know, at least I don't really know in a microscopic sense what he does at his job. If he just sort of has a desk and it's like, okay, Barnabas, that's fine. You did, I almost get the sense that Barnabas is either supremely unmotivated in a lot of ways, that maybe he longs to be a poet or something like that, that Joshua can bring himself to say with even greater difficulty than vampire.
Right.
And that really by the end of the series we know almost as much about him, other than just facts of his life, that he married Angelique at this point, that he was in
Right.
Martinique at that point. He's just sort of like quantitative stuff.
Yeah. And the thing that he says to people can't necessarily be trusted as being entirely accurate. So.
Oh yeah, I'm in town on business, but he never says never tells Liz right. What business that is. Yeah. And that we almost know more about a number of the other characters, even Professor Stokes, who at least likes cheese and sherry.
And he's a professor at the local college.
But Barnabas is not one, perhaps because of his status and from where he came from, just general politeness. He's not one to talk about himself.
Right.
A lot, other than his own urges, and we've got to kill this person or that person. Then
right.
Julia and Willie talk him out of it, and he's like, "Ah, shit, okay, back to square one."
He has two urges: control and survival. In the early
time.
That seem to be the two urges that propel him the most, and they both also typically, because when he waxes romantic, those two urges encompass Josette. When he waxes practical, it's usually about, like you say, killing somebody to protect his secret, or making a deal with Dr. Hoffman.
And those things are corollaries to his pursuit of Josette.
Right. Because he wants to be right. He decides that he's willing to take the risk to be human again, so that he can have at least a measure of a Josette of some kind. It ends up being Vicky after the Maggie thing doesn't work out. But I tend to agree. I think that in that overall arch, he fails somewhat miserably at times. He fails because he's sort of, that's part of a series of ideas, but it's certainly a prominent idea that he's sort of, pardon the pun, chained to.
And I don't know in a future Dark Shadows if a richer, more detailed picture of Barnabas would be a good thing or a bad thing, because he is a little bit of a cipher. The cool thing about knowing so little about Barnabas is I think it makes it easier and easier to identify with him, because if you can identify on that one thing, on the lost love thing, which most people can.
Yes.
Boom.
You can put your own experiences or aspirations onto that.
But once you find out, he's a philatelist. Okay, now I can't identify with him as much. Jewel, have you ever been into philatelism?
No.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure.
Some people philatelize in public.
It's true. It's not illegal. It sounds illegal, but it's not.
Jewel, it's stamp collecting, I believe.
Yes, it is.
How old do I look here?
How what do you look?
How old do I look here?
Stamp collecting.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
that's a savage cut.
Like seriously, like stamp collecting. Like, did you guys
did that back in the 70s?
Because I am a part-time, I was able to make these. That's a real stamp, by the way. Speaking of philately, it's a 67, 68 6-cent stamp U.S. Postal Service. But this is a reproduction of a letter that was actually sent out from ABC Dan Curtis Productions on the 1st of January, 1968, which had, you may have seen this before, had this in it.
Wow.
They took it from they created, that was from the first mailing list that they created in the months after Frid took over the role, and they started getting all this fan mail, and they put this little guy in there too.
Nice.
That, you could cut up somewhat obscenely to make a light switch cover.
Yes, absolutely. Potency of our vampire friend. Electrifying.
I'm going to answer the Bechdel question last because it's the easiest to answer. The question first becomes, who is Barnabas Collins? So we have to get into a bit of a deep dive here. We know his first and last name. We don't. Now, there's two ways we could look at this. We could go.
Joel, I got to pause. I suspect everyone, and I suspect no one. Keep going.
Well, there's two ways we could look at this. We can't just look at Barnabas as a vampire. We first have to look at Barnabas as what he started off as, a human being, because he was a living mortal man. He was once he was an infant, then he was a teenager, then he became an adult. We meet Barnabas in his 40s. When we go back to 1795, which that's where I'll start. That's where I'll start this. So we don't know his young life. We don't know how long ago he met Angelique until whatever. We could guess the age he met Angelique. It was probably in his 20s, give or take. Again, I'm estimating. We don't know for sure, for concrete.
Yeah, we don't even know how many trips he took to Martinique.
Right. We don't know, how old he was, right? Now, what do we know about him as a person? Okay. We know he's intimidated by his father, Joshua, which that seems to be a long list of people who are intimidated by his father. So he's not alone in that category. He also works for his father. Again, he's not alone in that category either. He is a man of his word. When he's a human being, he doesn't lie, or at least try to lie. He's not this ruthless liar who's lying to save his ass. That doesn't really happen until he becomes a member of the undead.
Right. Because that's the installation of a serious and pivotal secret in his life.
Okay.
Right.
I mean, he does kind of lie to Josette about that maid.
Yes. He is a bit of a horn.
It's a little lie. It's a little.
He's a living guy, so he's got the horn dog thing going on.
Eatsy, Josette dear. There was just one little.
Now, there's two ways he could have handled that. He could have looked at her and said, Josette, you know that woman Angelique who's your servant? Yeah, we had sex.
That's not going to go.
That's not going to work.
Right. No, but you get what I'm saying. We know that wasn't going to happen. Now, because of the show and the time, obviously.
Yeah.
But also, too, when you look at Barnabas, the other question we can try to answer is, why did he fear his father, and why didn't he? If he really loved Angelique, why didn't he just stay with her? I don't think it's as simple as cutting the inheritance, because here's the thing: he marries Angelique because he gave his word to her. If she could cure Sarah, he would marry her, and she does, and he keeps his word. He loses his inheritance from Joshua. Okay, I'm cutting you off. The only thing he keeps is the old house because of his mom.
I think you're right about Josette. His relationship to Josette, he develops a romantic attachment to her fairly swiftly. So she does become more important than just an arrangement.
Right. She does become more important, but because if she hadn't, there would be no duel with Jeremiah. The duel, I think that's another key thing too. The duel isn't a result of any kind isn't, well, it's sort of the result of Angelique's spell in a sense, because she did put a spell on Jeremiah and Josette to fall in love. But the challenge of a duel was strictly done by Barnabas. Okay, he took the glove, he smacked Jeremiah across the face. I challenge you to a duel. Angelique feared for losing her meal ticket, if you will, because she realized this guy can't shoot worth shit. Now she knew that from somewhere in time, past experience. We don't know how she knew.
Well, yeah, she's met him. I mean, you know.
Well, right, she met him, but maybe right. So she knows that he's a poor shot, so she puts the spell to protect Barnabas. Barnabas wins the duel, killing Jeremiah. Now, he still is in love with Josette. So eventually Barnabas does marry Angelique. He does figure out she's a witch. He tries to stab her at first, but she catches, she's like, oh, so you hate me that much. Then as she's taking pins into Sarah's doll, he grabs the flintlock, which he brought into the room earlier, and he shoots her ass in the shoulder. Doesn't kill her. She thinks she's going to die. She curses her to be a vampire. Now, that's when Barnabas sort of not just physically changes, but his mentality changes to a degree, because he has to lie to protect his secret. He relies on Ben, who's been his not just his trusted ally and friend, but to guard his coffin and to keep him informed on what's going on. But Ben is also somebody who's under control of Angelique, because Ben's the one who tells him, who confirms Barnabas' suspicion. He goes, write her name, write the letter of her name, and when he puts V, at first he goes V for Victoria, and then he crosses it in the dirt. A for Angelique. He's just confirming Barnabas' suspicion. Barnabas already figures it's Angelique. He just wants confirmation. Now, with Barnabas the man, after he becomes a vampire, him and his father's reactions are key, because his father goes, I can't believe you're here. I can't believe you're alive. His father's in shock of all this. His father thought, hey, my son's dead. He was not expecting this, right? So we finally see Joshua really start to soften up when he sees Barnabas. Sarah died. We know that he actually blames the attacks on Millicent by Barnabas. He goes, no, I didn't touch Millicent. He goes, I didn't do it. We know Nathan Forbes is working his handy. Him and Noah Gifford are working their handiwork. Eventually they get dealt with, we'll say. I know I'm jumping around, but I'm trying to make the point of Barnabas the man. I think there's a lot of pain in Barnabas' life, not just losing Josette. There's also a lot of pain in Joshua's life, which causes him to change the man he is in a lot of ways. Joshua loses both his kids, his wife, and he almost loses his nephew, Daniel, almost. Here's a man who was the hardest, almost said the hardest screw to walk the halls of Shawshank, but I'm joking. He's a hard man in Collinwood, in the Collins family history. He was no nonsense, and he wasn't somebody you wanted to mess with. Barnabas does take some of his father's logic. If you leave Barnabas alone, if you're not trying to snoop around and cover a secret, and you're not some prostitute that Willie goes and grabs, you're pretty much safe. But if you mess with Barnabas and try to find out all about him, yeah, you're a dead man walking, unless you happen to be dating Victoria Winters and you're Bert Devlin, and Barnabas plays the chess game very well and involves Vicky and saying, oh yeah, he's doing background checks on me. And because Willie's like, you can't just kill Bert Devlin the way you did Jason McGuire. People will ask questions. People ask, where'd he go? Because when he gets rid of Jason McGuire, nobody gives a shit where Jason goes. Jason doesn't have any allies other than Willie, and Willie was his best friend. And Willie at the time was working for Barnabas. Willie's the one that let Barnabas out, as we all know.
I mean, Jason McGuire is Jason McGuire's best friend.
Yes, absolutely. And he also he's the method by which Barnabas can kill and still be sympathetic to a great deal of the audience in terms of a dramatic sort of device, because he's just the worst. The interesting thing is, too, you want to talk about the difference between him as a man. He's more of a naif when we first see him as a man. He becomes a little bit more jaded because of figuring out Angelique is a witch and all this sort of thing. So he takes that with him and that unfair thing into being coffin bound, and then having to tell his father who he is, and then having to make this consideration: you can destroy me because I can't do it myself. That kind of thing. So you've got this sort of jaded, almost like resignation going on. But when he wakes up after 175 years, everything's on steroids, because he's literally insane from having been cooped up in a freaking coffin for 170 something years. So he wants to survive, so immediately he has to feed. B, his sophistication turns into manipulation, and he also, his sense of privilege and his sense of being part of the ruling class, because he's wealthy, he comes from a wealthy family, becomes even bigger. He then becomes, as a vampire early on, he becomes, he enables himself to say, hey, I have a right to this woman as Josette, or I have a right to Victoria as sort of Josette, and how dare this Burke Devlin guy come in and try to usurp me? How dare he do that? And there's that kind of an attitude, because he does come from that kind of wealth, power, and privilege, regardless of what he ended up doing for his family. And I don't know how skilled he was. I guess he was probably studying his father's business, but we never know, as you pointed out earlier, we never really know what that's about. But what we do know is character development stuff, even if we don't know the fuzzy details of some of it. We know a lot more details after we go back to 1795, but then going back from that and the hindsight 2020 business, you see a creation of a character who's been jaded, who's been destroyed, betrayed, punished. All of these sorts of things have happened to him, and so when he crawls out of that crypt, he's ready to chew bubble gum and kick ass. And that whole thing is what propels him as the marauder, as Dan Curtis initially saw him, but makes more sense in hindsight, or forward sight and then hindsight, after that flashback, which is the whole purpose of the flashback, is to make sense out of who he is and make him more human and make him more accessible to the audience, so they get more of those fan letters that they can make lists for and send out more stuff, right?
Well, here's the thing too. In 1795, there's a bit of a telltale on Barnabas. When Josette's aunt has the tarot cards, he sees it, he participates a bit, and he says he wishes he would know a lot more about it because he's interested in that kind of stuff. So what we learn is Barnabas is somewhat interested in the occult. And maybe, now he doesn't know Angelique's a witch, but when you look at Angelique, it's like, that woman looks like she's wicked. And maybe that's part of the fascination too. So I'm not trying to add
she does when she's angry.
Yeah.
But so do most people.
Yeah.
Well, they don't.
Her circumstance allows for some extreme responses.
They don't all punch a hole in a wall like Jolie Saints.
Right. Okay.
Uncomfortable with this.
Punching tails out of school.
I will say that Angelique, or with Barnabas. Barnabas being interested in him telling that to Natalie is really interesting because it makes you think, did Joshua ever know that? No, I don't think he did. But I do think that Barnabas feared not losing inheritance from his father, and this is the point I forgot to make.
Wouldn't.
The thing I think he feared his father would do, what he would literally come up if he stayed in Martinique and actually just chose to be with Angelique. I think he thought at that whatever age it was he met her, I think he thought, my father will come here with ships and he will level her.
Well, he'll just take him home. He'll just take him home by force. I think it was. I don't think
Joshua was a businessman. He's not going to go tearing up a.
I'm not so sold he wouldn't tear it up. Here's this guy.
The way that Barnabas raised, I don't see him marrying a maid.
Who was so cold to his. I mean, yeah, it's
how cold was he?
Very cold to his own family. Cold. And the only reason he started to family give a shit is when people around him started dying, and even Barnabas.
It tends to focus a man's
attention. It doesn't it?
Well, think about this too. When Barnabas says, "Destroy me, Father," why do you think Barnabas is so certain Joshua will? Because really, when we go
because he's a monster from hell.
Right, and also because Joshua has a sense of status, a sense of scandal, the image of the family, and all that, which of course is a through line that runs through the entire series. At one point or another, somebody in the family is talking about the family name.
Joshua's not super in touch with his emotions.
No.
And his sense of affection. That doesn't necessarily mean that he is, this. Baby Hitler that you're making him out to be.
Not baby. I'm not saying he's necessarily baby Hitler.
You just said
that.
But
in the same sense, okay. What does Joshua do when Barnabas dies? Oh, hey, he just went to England, and everybody has to swallow it. Everybody there has to swallow that.
That's yeah.
And
it's a reasonable story.
When his son asked, Dad, you do it, you kill me. The reason Barnabas is so sure is because his father is such a cold son of a bitch. He's sure his father will pull the trigger and not think twice about it.
It was a different time also.
No, I'm not denying
they had duels and sometimes triples.
I'm not denying that, but in
and it wasn't the age of romance had not hit colonies. In other words, people didn't marry for romantic love. There wasn't a lot of filial. There was respect and loyalty and things like that. That was valued over what we would call.
Really, love as we think of it today, not that much of a thing.
Not that much of a thing. Yeah, some, but not.
No, I understand. I understand all that, guys, but in the same sense, I understand it's a period of the time. I get all that, but what I'm saying is, Barnabas knew what kind of man his father really was.
He didn't view his father as a cold person. That's true.
Yeah,
it's very true. So there.
But he didn't know him that well,
right?
Because Joshua can't do it.
Right.
Well, how many people has Joshua watched die though, including Barnabas initially?
Well, I mean, not like as an eager. He didn't have this. He was.
Well, no, I know that.
I mean, I think he's more sensitive to death rather than less because of all of this. I mean,
I think
a lot he's had to go through. And by the way, people having to swallow. I'm sorry, Alan.
It's okay. Barnabas's perception of his father it plays a big role in why I think you're right in terms of his perception of his father, but he's wrong in terms of how far his father would go.
Yeah,
I think that his father actually did have affection for him, even though he never showed it, and he couldn't kill him, so he sealed him up in a coffin, which actually was a living hell worse.
It was worse.
But the one thing he did do that he could always be assured of, and that was keep a secret.
Yeah.
And the family kept
Guy's a vault.
it down, so that's how the whole thing, he went to England started. And of course he picked that up when he came out of the coffin.
And given all the death that Barnabas has, I think probably went to England was a phrase they used a lot around Collinsport. But given all the death and tragedy that Barnabas experienced, I don't think anyone would have to swallow the fact that he got as far from Dodge as possible.
Yeah.
He went to a big, sophisticated, futuristic, civilized city with modern medicine,
right,
and cops and laws and
entertainments and all sorts. Wouldn't have a village like Collinsport. Probably only had a couple thousand people in it at its peak, and that might not have been its peak. So it might only have been 400 or 500 people there at that point.
Yeah, and to answer the question of did he pass the test? No. He didn't pass the test.
Not on those terms that
but I also
Patrick set, or even you set, that he did not pass.
But I also think too, when you get into characters, especially Barnabas, it's all about what haunts you and what memories haunt you. Here's a man who spent all that time in the coffin. When he talks to Josette's portrait, he's not necessarily yelling at her. He's not angry at her. He's hurt by the betrayal of, I didn't expect to be standing in this very room ever again, or locked in a coffin. But the real telltale discussion too is with Vicky and Carolyn about Josette's death, about how he ran from the man she ran from the man she loved, and which they say Jeremiah, but Barnabas doesn't correct them. He just stands there and continues the story.
Well, I mean, that story got retconned later a little bit anyway. Some detail. So, but I mean, the general story stayed the same. So,
like Lockjaw not being able not knowing how to talk.
Now,
that broke my heart. God damn you, John Byrne.
With the rule of now, he doesn't mention Angelique in that story, and I know technically the character isn't created yet.
That's right.
But from a conscience standpoint, he could have been thinking about her at that moment too, because who causes Josette's death? Angelique, in a sense.
I mean, I think you can imagine when he's in the coffin, he's having all sorts of mental conversations with all the people in his life, including, Josette. Oh my God, if I ever get out of here, Angelique.
There's a last scene in I, Claudius, which I guess we'll never get to see. But it's Claudius having a set of moments that I think probably is a lot like what Barnabas goes through.
Yeah.
That's a separate question. It's an interesting one. And that is, what evidence, and of course, I'm sure there's copious on either side, what evidence do we have that Barnabas was aware of things for the entire time he was in the coffin? Or was he in sort of suspended animation once that cross was put in there?
Right.
I sort of get the idea that he was in torpor.
Yeah.
With occasional dreams that he was still was aware of.
Yeah, dream state, maybe. Yeah.
Because I even at his weirdest, he's far too sane.
Yeah.
To have been in the sensory deprivation pod.
Yeah, his insanity isn't complete disorientation. You're right.
It's as not. I call it, the Necropod 1.
Yeah.
Boy, there's a lot to unpack here. Specifically about his feelings for Josette and his feelings for Angelique and what was going on. Yes. I think he really convinced himself, at the very least, that he had a love for Josette that superseded his feelings for Angelique. And I think he convinced himself that Angelique was not that much. And I do think probably some of it came from the fact that under almost any circumstances, this would have been a really impossible romance.
Right, which means in his mind it's probably, it's an impossible romance. We're never going to get married, but let's have some carnal fun here and, like each other.
there's also that. And what we don't exactly know is the timeline of, how long did he know Angelique before Josette showed up, or was it simultaneous?
Right.
We don't really know those things. But I think the fact that society, for somebody like that, it would have had to have been the bizarre circumstances that occur in 1795 that made it possible.
Yeah.
For someone to marry somebody. Because now everybody's dead and going back to France, and it's like, fine, Barnabas, you want to get married, I'll disown you, but at least we won't wonder.
I tend to think her before, and then Angelique got herself into the maid service of the family so that she would end up sailing over to the New World.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, she may not have been the maid exactly when he met her. He might have just thought she was an island girl or something, a very pale island girl, but she's serving cocktails at Club Med, whatever.
Yeah.
One of the things that really impresses me about Angelique is the fact that she takes or keeps this job that she doesn't need with the Dupreys, and she does a good job of it. And the amount, for someone who seems to be so capricious, the amount of a long game that she plays.
Oh, absolutely.
And how difficult that is. It's back-breaking labor. Of course, she can heal her own back. I'm sure it looks like a scene out of Enchanted when, they leave the room in terms of like cockroaches coming and cleaning things up and all of that. But, while she's sitting there reading, the Malacara Malfacum or whatever it was. But then for her, at what I understand was the most difficult time of the year meteorologically, to go to America on one of these ships, what an unbelievably perilous journey that would be anyway.
Yeah.
All the way up to Maine? Are you kidding me? I'm hopeful they got out at New York and, took the who's it's what's it's up there, New York and Boston, someplace.
Maybe get at least one bath out of the deal, sailing.
Well, I would think after just a day of that sea voyage, depending on the time of year, you'd be ready for dry land.
Nasty.
So it was and she can't use that many of her powers. She can't like throw a Sue Richards kind of bubble up or something like that and protect herself. So, so just the fact she does this for Barnabas, that's a hell of a statement of love. I mean, it's weird
either a hell of a statement of love, or it's a hell of a statement of obsessive, possessive.
Sure.
Version of love.
Yes. It's both. It's candy mint and a breath mint. But
it's in one.
But I really appreciate that. And and I see this as being the more he wants to run away from Angelique, and then later anything Angelique did, like make him a vampire, the more it just becomes about Josette. And there was an episode of the show, and damn it, I'm trying to remember what it was, but it's Barnabas has gotten some bad news. This was a few months ago in terms of when the episode would have been.
Mm-hmm.
So it's towards the end of 1795. And it's a scene he has with Josette. I think it's the scene where Josette agrees to become a vampire. Go back and watch this episode, because there is a sense of acceptance that just radiates from her. That, I don't know how much she loves him or he loves her. I know they use those words, but by God, she accepts him.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think Angelique really did, was she accepted him. And Joshua, I suspect, always wanted him to be more business-minded or manlier, like Jeremiah, or, be like
about his life choices.
Yeah, be like me or like him, or even be able to hold your liquor like your mom. But one of
something.
Gosh, I'm glad I remembered that episode.
Yeah. I think his father definitely looked at him as sort of having the weakness of being emotional and too damn nice to people sometimes in those earlier episodes, 95. So yeah, definitely.
So here's what I did. I actually used Jonathan Frid's real age at the time he played the character for Barnabas. He was 43.
Sure.
So the character of Barnabas by this would have been born 1752. Okay. So this is the reason I did this. What year do you think he met Angelique?
What year did he meet Angelique? I would say 1749 at the latest. I think this is only a relationship that's 3 or 4 years old at the most. Because Josette's not that old. Because if you take Fred at his age, which I think is a good idea, you have to take Catherine Lee Scott at her age.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, she would have been 24, I think, at that time, something like that, 24, 25.
Well, Catherine turned this year.
I know. So that's so she. I thought it was late last year.
No, it was January.
Was okay. So, so she's 23. She's 23. She turned 24 in January of 68. So she was between. Yeah. So.
And that even means for marriage age back then, Josette was getting a little long in the
damn old maid. She's probably 8 years.
I'm so glad you guys. Yeah, I'm so glad you guys don't buy this this business of Barnabas being 27 or something like that.
What?
Which is the original canon. I just think that's a screwed up.
Like he was coming out of a
it's like a stonemason made a mistake, and Joshua was too cheap to have it fixed. It's like, okay, whatever. I think one of the many things that makes Barnabas so endearing is his middle-aged status.
Yeah.
And the fact that an Angelique or a Josette, actually either one of them means a hell of a lot more to you at that point than when you're in your mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
You're really going for the brass ring when you're 42 years old and your paramour is only 23.
The last brass ring that you may see. You don't take him for granted.
No.
I do think, and this is just my opinion, I think he met Angelique probably because sailing during Barnabas's time, most sailors were probably a lot younger than what they were now. I do think he probably met her when he was 16 or 17. When Barnabas was 16 and 17.
How old was she?
She would have been about 10, probably. Maybe.
He's not Indiana Jones with Marion Ravenwood.
No, he's not. I don't think they had sex at that moment because that'd have been sweet. No, but what I think happened. Listen,
maybe. She was a child when he first met her.
Right. Maybe when they first met, they were just children.
Well,
and they were just friendly with each other. And then later on, he came back when he got a little older, but before he met Josette.
Okay.
And then she was old enough. Again, just saying.
If we're playing this game, what year was Laura Parker born?
Oh, hold on.
That would have been 1938.
Okay, 1938. So she was how old in 1968?
She would have been 30, 29 when she first came on the show, probably, and 30 there soon thereafter.
Okay, well, he said 30, just for the sake of math.
Yep.
So Jonathan Frid is 13 years older than she was. So if he met her when he was 16, Jewel, she would have been 3?
Maybe.
I didn't know that at the time, so.
Who probably was only about 16.
Okay, so obviously he didn't meet her till way later. Right?
Maybe it would have been a little bit later than that, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he was in his 30s and she was like a teenager.
Right.
You know, that would be actually fairly realistic for those times, especially since he's a healthy man.
Yes.
Yeah. I did not know Laura Parker. I only looked up Bouchard. So I will say that too, the promise of marrying Josette, because that was all Joshua wanted this. He didn't just want that marriage to work out too. He also told Jeremiah, "Oh, you can marry Millicent." Joshua told.
Gee, thanks.
Yeah, gee, thanks.
Yeah, it's like really. It's like really. Like no, but
you Jeremiah get the liberty gibbet. We Barnabas gets the wealth of the merging of two wealthy families.
Right.
Well, considering how Jeremiah's last wife went, maybe someone who was a little light on the in the sausage curls there might have been a good thing.
Well, he basically he tells Joshua, no, that's not happening, which I love Jeremiah for that.
Jeremiah's got an active social life, I think.
Right. Jeremiah's just not going for marrying his cousin, and that's the thing too. Like when you watch Jeremiah react to Josette without Jeremiah being understood, he's like, "You're marrying Barnabas. I have no interest in you, really," and he doesn't. And it's like you could tell this dude is not looking to get hitched at all.
Certainly not within the parameters of what Joshua wants.
Right.
Definitely not wanting anything to do with that. He doesn't. I think Jeremiah may be as much of a romantic in some ways for the time as Barnabas is, not wanting to be into a marriage of convenience, even though Barnabas, I think he does kind of fall in love on some level with Josette, but at the same time, that is a marriage. Arranged marriage between two very influential families. So
it's all for Joshua. It's all about the money. For Barnabas, it's like, okay, I gotta make my dad happy, but I'm also happy with this girl.
Right. Yeah. It seems to have come to terms with that a little bit.
Right.
Better. But Joshua's no. Cousins do not marry in my mind, even though they did marry quite frequently back then. If again, it was to solidify family connections, weirdly, and of course we all know royal families and cousins. That crazy stuff's been going on.
Well, I got one for you, buddy. You know who Jesse James married? The outlaw.
Don't tell me it was his sister.
His first cousin.
Okay, first cousin. That's bad enough. Yeah.
Oh my god.
I'll tell you a funny story. In my family, my mother was born out of wedlock.
Huh?
My grandmother had a dalliance with a young man who left the scene. Yeah. So her first cousin volunteered to marry her, and that's what happened. And he adopted my mother, and they had two other children together. Cool. This was in the 1920s, early 30s. It was in rural Maine, and buddy, I got to tell you, that was one of the least controversial of the intermarriages that you'd find in those days. I'm sure that up there in hill country, you probably heard plenty of stories too. So,
yeah, plenty of stories. Now I had family in little old Whitwell, Tennessee, which is a very small town. But that was a long time ago. So
yeah,
I remember my Uncle Bill explaining to me what a shotgun wedding was.
Oh yes, yeah.
I'm like, they really had those? He's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, 1949, when my parents got married, my mother was, they got married in July. She was 3 months pregnant.
Yeah.
So,
there you go.
Wasn't a shotgun marriage because they were actually were in a relationship and were planning to get married anyway. So, but it could have been. It could have been.
Guys, this has been a lot of fun. Is there anything you guys want to add before we go?
Yeah, stick around after this because I got some things I want to review with you, gentlemen.
Cool.
Okay.
Awesome.
Alan, anything you want to add before we go?
I just think that, yeah, I mean, as interesting as Barnabas is, he definitely flunks the parameters of the test that we ascribed to him. There's no doubt about it. He was, over the long term, he was very much obsessed with this romantic image, if not an actual person. So.
I got two horror icons that pass the test and one horror icon that fails the test. Two that pass it, Michael Audrey Myers, he doesn't mention anybody.
No.
And Jason Voorhees, he doesn't mention anybody.
Default.
And the person who fails it, Freddy Krueger, he mentions a bunch of people. So, first of all, guys, this has been a lot of fun. Links to Alan Gallant's YouTube channel, Collins Sport After Dark, is going to be in the description box. Link to Patrick McCray's Dark Shadows Day Book of Bow is going to be in the description box. And yes, we will be back for I, Claudius tomorrow night if Patrick's available.
Of course.
Okay.
I will try to be. I have a late night lighting hang to do, but I may maybe still be able to make it. So.
Excellent.